Good to have your company. The Greens are demanding the government's energy market overhaul go further to win the party's backing in the legislation, while the business community is warning Labor is effectively nationalising the gas market. Live to Sky News political reporter Joel Philp. Joel, we've heard from the Greens leader Adam Bandt today around some of his caveats for support.
Yeah, that's right, Tom. Look, it looks like the government will need the Greens in order to get this legislation passed through in this emergency sitting day of Parliament on Thursday, because the coalition is not keen to support any form of price caps, which is being suggested under these reforms. But the Greens have made a list of demands, and some of them they say they're not willing to back down on. They are willing to come to a middle ground, but they've outlined a few specific areas. One of them is compensation for fossil fuel companies. Now, under the government's plan, especially regarding coal, if they are setting a price cap, any companies which have an operating cost which is above that cap, those companies could be compensated in negotiations that are still ongoing with the states involved there. The Greens say they don't want that to occur, that fossil fuel companies shouldn't be compensated in this situation. And beyond that, they also want to make sure that households have some form of incentivisation or support to move away from fossil fuel technologies within their own households. Things like stovetop ovens, which are running not on gas, but are instead electric driven during this price cap period. So over the next 12 months or so, they want to see some form of incentives on that front. Here's the Greens leader, Adam Bandt.
If there's a way of ensuring that the legislation does not compensate these coal and gas giants, and that we can help households and businesses get off expensive and dirty gas while temporary price caps are in place, and that we don't slow down the transition to renewables, then that's where we'd like to land.
It's worth noting that, as I understand it, when it comes to the compensation for fossil fuel production companies, that's not actually part of the legislation which is going to be introduced on Thursday. And that is instead all about putting these caps in place and making sure that they are enforceable. That's a separate thing being negotiated through the states. Now, beyond that, the Prime Minister says that he's quite confident. He said on radio this morning that a deal will be struck on this single sitting day of Parliament.
I am very confident that when faced with, do you want a price cap on gas? A majority of the House and the Senate will say yes. And when asked, do you want relief to reduce people's energy bills, they'll say yes as well.
Meanwhile, the Treasurer confirming Labor will also pursue this permanent price control, again, just on domestic gas. It's a so-called reasonable price test.
Yeah, that's right. Look, the government is also working through a mandatory code of conduct that gas producers would have to operate under in this country. And within that, they are talking about a framework to ensure that the reasonable prices are charged in Australia. The Treasurer indeed conceded that Labor will be pursuing that. He said this today.
These companies are doing incredibly well on global markets. We support the industry, but we don't want these high prices to hollow out local industries and put extra pressure on families if we can avoid it. That's why there'll be a temporary price cap for 12 months and an ongoing reasonable pricing regime.
Now we've discovered late Friday evening this reasonableness test, which means that the industry has this dark cloud hanging over it for years and years to come.
And Tom, when it comes to that mandatory code of conduct, it isn't something the government is trying to get rushed through this week, but instead the Treasurer says that they'll be consulting on it until February.